So welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about weight, but I'm going to try and get you to think about weight in a very different way that I think is much more conducive to addressing the problems that people think about when they talk about weight. And obviously it's something that almost everyone struggles with at some point in their life. And it's pretty complicated. We tried to say that it wasn't, especially in medicine, and that we just talk about eat less, move more, done. And obviously that didn't work out well. So why don't we just, and also I like to have you, if you have a question or a thought or something, just jump in, hello. And don't wait for the end or something, because it's a small enough group that we can do things that way. So in terms of aging, I thought I'd start with what, the averages are, and they're kind of astounding. Between 30 and 60, you gain about a pound of fat a year and lose half a pound of muscle per year. So on your 60th birthday, you're 30 pounds more fat and 15 pounds less muscle. Happy birthday, right? Terrific. But one of the things that this can illustrate is the difference between weight. That's it, sorry.
Oh, I just screwed it up totally. Sorry, I did not.
No problem. Yeah.
No, I need to. I'm not seeing, I don't think the people online are seeing the PowerPoint.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go check my screen in this. You can go ahead.
Should we? Okay.
Problem.
All right. So as you can see here, if you were just looking at weight, getting on a scale and to see how you've done from when you were 30 to 60, you'd say, well, you've gained a pound of fat and you've lost half a pound, so you've gained 15 pounds. Sounds a lot less bad than gaining 30 pounds. But the thing is, it's much worse, actually, than just gaining 15 pounds, because you gain 15 pounds mostly by losing muscle and increasing fat. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk a lot about today is muscle, because I think it's the stepchild or something of the body, and it's been relegated to this place of first bodybuilders, and then it's not associated with runners. You can be an intellectual, but if you have a little too much muscle on you, and it's a funny stereotype, but muscle is one of the most important things to maintain as we age, because it has everything to do with how we're going to do. You cannot do well if you're losing muscle. And so we're going to talk a lot about that. And also how it relates to managing weight. But I'm going to refer mainly to weight to body composition. And so if we just compare the two a little bit in the beginning here, you really get a lot of health information by looking at body composition. First of all, it tells you your bone mineral density, which becomes a real important thing to track as we get older. It tells you how much fat mass you have, how much muscle mass you have. And that's extraordinarily important, because that has a huge influence on metabolism and metabolic rate. The more muscle you have, the higher your metabolic rate, the more calories you burn all the time, whether you're moving or not. DEXA, I don't know if people have had bone scans probably here, right? Have you had one that told you how much lean mass you have and how much fat you have? Did they include that? No. It's funny, because I think that's probably one of the most important tests that I would get. You don't have to get it often, but I would certainly get it when I started working with a patient or client, because it tells you a lot. DEXA is the machine that does it, and it's very low dose. It's nothing to be concerned about. And it's very infrequently used. Weight is just one measure. You know, it gives you what happens to a scale when you stand on it. It doesn't tell you a lot about, you know, your health, except at the extremes. And you can have people who are, you know, in a good weight range who aren't healthy. And one of the reasons that can happen is when they have very little muscle mass. Muscle weighs more than fat, you know, but it can be deceiving. The other thing I wanted to try and get across is that nobody wants to really lose weight. That's not, I mean, they want to lose weight, but the reason they want to lose weight is not because of the weight. It's because they want to either, you know, these things, look better, fit into clothing, move more comfortably, you know, feel more energy, improve their health. These are all things that you can do by increasing muscle and decreasing fat, and you may or may not lose weight, right? Depending on where you're starting from. But weight is not going to be an index of those things. So the other focus is going to be on metabolism, because that is the only thing that makes sense in order to understand how our body composition changes. And, you know, the whole idea of metabolism is it's what happens when we take in food and break it down into either, you know, energy or into building blocks for the body. And if you think about it, most of the disease that we're confronted with now is metabolic disease. It could be diabetes, obesity, hypertension. They're mainly consequences of this organization, right? So it really boils down to an energy crisis. We're drowning in excess energy, right? And this is something that, as a species, we've never seen before. We are designed through thousands and thousands and thousands of years to be incredibly good at holding on to calories, because that's how we survived, because we had unpredictable amounts of time between meals, right? And, you know, it's kind of interesting how, you know, there has been so much theory about if you're going to work out, you should have a good meal for breakfast and that's not how we are wired necessarily. I mean, we went on the hunt when we'd run out of food. We didn't have a nice breakfast before we went hunting, you know. So there's a lot of ideas that have to be thought about again. And breakfast is one of them, and I'll talk about that. So what happens when you don't use energy? We've evolved to a point where we store it, you know, and you store, you know, a little bit of glycogen, which is sort of a very quick usable form of glucose. But, you know, it's got water attached to it. So you can't store a lot of it without, you know, putting on a huge amount of weight, which would be impossible. And so it goes to fat. And there are two places that you find fat. One is subcutaneous, which is provides insulation and cushioning. And the other is visceral, and that just means the organs. And what happens is the subcutaneous, when it gets full, when it can't expand much more, the fat starts going to the visceral. And that's the dangerous kind of fat, because it's very inflammatory. So metabolic disease, right? I mean, what is diabetes except that you're overwhelmed by, you know, sugar metabolism, right? I'm talking about type 2, you know, not the inherited. 1.5 million new cases a year now. Between 90 and 2010, the prevalence of diabetes tripled. In 1958, 1% of the population had type 2 diabetes. And now it's over 10%. So 34.2 million people, and of those, 25% of them or so are over 65. So it's something that we see with aging. And it seems as if, you know, and this is another thing that is being challenged now, but, you know, so many notions about normal aging were really pathology. but it was normal in terms of averages. It was mathematically normal, but it was not normal in terms of physiology. And if we live differently, we can see that. And one of the things that we thought was normal aging was insulin sensitivity would just go down, and if it went far enough down, you would become a type 2 diabetic. Obesity is another metabolic, issue. 2 out of 3 adults are overweight or obese, and more than 1 out of 3 are obese. Civil War to the 1960s, there was a 1.5 increase in the BMI, which is body mass index, which is something that's done by calculating height and weight. And it also is flawed because depending upon how much muscle to fat you have, it's going to misrepresent where you are on a health scale. But so between over about 100 years, Civil War to 1960, there was a 10-pound or so increase in BMI. From 1980 to 2000, there was a 2.3-point increase. So in 20 years, almost double what happened in 100. And in the past 20 years, the average BMI has increased more than 7 times faster than the rate over the previous century. So something very wrong is happening, right? And we all know that. And one of the problems, I think, is that you're going to laugh probably, but I think is that in a capitalist society, you have products that are going to be sold, and you have corporations making huge amounts of money, and whether that's good for you or not is irrelevant. It's, are the stockholders or, making money. And the food industry is no exception. And the food industry has actually, it's an interesting story because a lot of the scientists from the tobacco industry, when tobacco was really seeing the writing on the wall, left and went to the food industry. And these are the people who, started doing what they call the bliss point, where there's a certain amount in a food product, there's a certain amount of salt, a certain amount of sour, a certain amount of sweet. It dissolves on the tongue in a certain amount. It's like a cigarette. It's a chemistry experiment. It's not a food. And I think that's another part of the problem. And then, of course, we don't move. You think about all the technological events. Do you remember when you had to get up and change the channel on the TV? You might be watching TV, but you still had to get up. And yeah, so a lot has changed. So we used to think it was simple, calories in, calories out. It's not, but it's still, that has to be looked at because that ultimately is going to tell you what's going on. So you reduce the energy in, the calories, you increase the energy out, which usually was in the form of what they recommend as exercise, and you'd have weight loss. And the problem is it's not so simple. One of the things that happens is as you take in fewer calories, the body has been wired to notice, and it thinks, well, we might be heading into a famine or something like that, and so we're going to cut energy burning. It's like a responsible governance, and so you start burning fewer calories, your metabolic rate goes down. So and it tries to find that balance again so that you don't lose weight. That's the body's goal, right? So that's tough. That's a hard thing. In terms of influence on energy obviously, appetite, how you feel satisfied to stop eating, what kind of food do you eat? In terms of the macronutrient, like fat, carbohydrate, protein breakdown, they're not created equal. Fat is 9 calories per gram, and protein and carb are 4. So that's different. The energy density of food, depending upon the proportion of those things. The eating window, when you eat is something I'll talk about, and that has a huge effect on metabolism. And then you have macronutrients, things like fiber, how the food's prepared. If you have pasta that you cook the hell out of, the starch is, ready to leap into your fat. It's just ready. But if it's not so well cooked, you don't absorb as much in terms of carbohydrate. And there's a lot of things like that. You know, you eat fruit. Food preparation is interesting. I mean, if you have people now who are drinking these things that have great things in them, but it's a quantity that it would be like a row in the garden. I mean, you know, it's like way more, whatever it is, kale or, you know, and so the body's not used to consuming. There's a reason that we adapted to the plants, right? They were here before us. We started eating them, and we adapted a digestive system that it takes some certain things happen in the mouth. There are enzymes that start breaking it down. The teeth goes into the stomach. It's broken down some more. It gets absorbed to a certain extent in the small intestine. Certain things. You put food into a liquid form, it just goes straight in, and you absorb way more, you know, than you would if it was in solid form. We've developed a real appreciation of the microbiome, which is, you know, the bacterial populations in the gut, which have a lot to do with how food is broken down, what, you know, compounds are created. Fiber affects transit time, and also the energy of digesting. And then obviously, you know, appetite and satiety are enormously affected by psychological states. You know, people eat for emotional, driven for emotional reasons, stress. I mean, sleep, you know, people who eat late, we know now gain weight much more than people who eat the same number of calories earlier in the day. It's really interesting. And one of the reasons is, you know, we have a different set of, you know, we have a night shift in a way and a day shift. And the day shift is geared toward taking energy, burning it, short time storage, you know, repair. The night shift is about storage. So, you know, you're going to hold on to more of what you eat when you eat it after dark. And dark is one of the things, you know, the body has a clock, and the two most powerful, you know, setters of the clock are light and food. So, you know, you also start seeing, you know, people with sleep problems that it can be related to eating late. So we'll get to some of that too. All right, in terms of energy burn, and this is, you know, sort of back to some science stuff, but I think it's important to see, these are the 4 places that you have calories burning, right? Resting metabolic rate, which is just the energy to keep the lights on, you know, kind of thing. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Thermogenesis is just energy burning, but you're creating heat as a result. But non-exercise is just anything that's not exercise or sport in people's lives, you know. So it's basically, you know, things we'll talk about in terms of sitting, walking, that kind of thing. Thermic effect of food, you know, is how much energy does it take to digest the food, which is interesting because it's very different for different macronutrients. And then exercise activity thermogenesis is actually exercising. How much calories do you burn? And before I go doing in terms of addressing, you know, weight loss, or saying, okay, of these things, on the other side, energy in was food. Let's decrease food, and on this side, it's increase this, right? What do you think the relative contribution of each of these is? Think about that percent. Like, you know, what percent? Oh, it's unstable. We're used to that. Yeah, so it's, think about how much does each of those contribute, and then resting metabolic rate. So this is just to keep the lights on. The energy required to maintain vital functions at rest in a fasted state in a thermoneutral environment. So no energy is being used to maintain body temperature, okay? That's something we're going to come back to. That's 70%. There are 4 categories, and that's already 70%. Unbelievable. Non-exercise activity. You know, and then also you have fidgety people, and they are in a category unto themselves because they burn wildly high amounts of energy sitting. It's also interesting. There was a thing, I wrote an article called the Soleus push-up, and there was this guy who did this study where, you know, we have always thought you want to engage as many muscles as possible to burn as much calories when you're exercising to try to lose weight, right? And he said, well, you know, maybe we've got it all wrong. And he said, what if we found a muscle that you could exercise while you're sitting for hours without, and the soleus is that muscle that is right underneath the gastrocnemius, right under the cap is the soleus. And he did this exercise where you basically sit in a chair and you keep the ball of your foot down and you just, you know, raise the heels. And you could do that forever, right? That's not surprising, but the surprising thing was what it did to the fat and glucose levels in the blood. It doubled fat metabolism. Unbelievable, right? It's a postural muscle. It's used to being used long-term, and it so happens, and maybe it's special because it's so necessary for ambulation, you know, that it is able to draw the fuel from the blood. It doesn't have to go to the glycogen or fat stores. So it really is an amazing impact. If you want to read that story, you can just Google Soleus push-up and you'll see things. Push-up with no total energy expenditure. Thermic effect of food is what, you know, we said is the amount of energy necessary to digest, absorb, you know, and metabolize food. So for fat, it's 1 to 3%, carbohydrate 5 to 10%, protein 20 to 30%. So what that means, here's an example so you can think about it. If you're eating a protein and it's 200 calories worth, you're going to burn 40 to 60 calories eating it, breaking it down and absorbing it. 20 to 30 versus fat, you don't burn much, you absorb that. And, you know, it's interesting because we had to be able to absorb fat. That was what was going to make you survive. You know, that was fuel in the tank. I mean, there was no show if you didn't have the energy. That's the difference between these two and this, right? Fat and carbohydrate are fuel sources. Protein is not a fuel source unless something's gone terribly wrong, you know? So protein is very different in all sorts of ways, function especially, to fat and carbohydrate. So thermic effect of food, 10%. Exercise. This was what we thought the big one, right? This is how you're going to compensate for the calories, energy expenditure. So obviously there's a range, but, you know, a beginning exercise maybe 250 calories an hour, and someone who's fairly advanced. And I'm not talking about a professional athlete or, you know, someone training professionally. Maybe. So it's one of the, just seeing that, you can see how of these choices, if we could affect the resting metabolic rate, that would be, you know, fantastic, because these other things are not really too responsive to, there's not a lot of room to change, you know, on the other categories. So let's come back to the resting metabolic rate. The stipulation, definition is that it's in a thermoneutral environment. So what happens if you lower the temperature? You know, we know the body generates heat, and it takes energy to generate heat. And so you're burning calories if you're generating heat. So how much of an effect would you say it is? Well, we're talking about that, but just quickly, there's three types. There's white, brown, and beige. And the reason they're different is they're different color is because of mitochondria, which are the energy factories of the cell, right? And so white has practically none, beige has a lot more, and brown has a lot. And mitochondria, it's like white meat and dark meat. The reason that it's dark meat on the chicken is because of mitochondria. I mean, those are the muscles that, it's not a coincidence that legs and wings are dark meat. I mean, that's where, the action is, right? So white adipose tissue is the vast majority in terms of volume. And it's, either subcutaneous or visceral. It's to store energy. It's widely distributed. And it's problematic because it's very inflammatory. It secretes these things, these compounds that are very inflammatory and are at the root of all of these diseases. So these diseases are this is how recent it is, 2009, cancer researchers were looking at subjects with a PET scanner. That's a positron emission tomography. So what it does is it shows you spots that are very active metabolically. And the reason that's interesting is because cancers are very active metabolically. And so it lights up spots where you have, and they found these spots that were not cancer, they were brown fat, very metabolically active. Yeah. And what happens in these brown fat cells is in the mitochondria is something called uncoupling. And it's just like if you were in a car with a stick shift and you put it in neutral and press the gas all the way down. You don't produce any motion, but you produce heat. That's what's happening in the mitochondria, right? They're burning. Heat generation is non-shivering thermogenesis. So you're burning fat. If you think about temperature control, we are living at an extreme that our species has never ever seen. I mean, between air conditioning and heat, we have practically no exposure unless you go out in the cold or go out. Some people do, obviously, but for the most part, we control it. Well, that's a whole source of unburned calories. We don't have to do the work. It's no different than not having to go and change the channels. It's another thing that we've lost. So this scientists looked at what temperature do you have to lower it to in order to get some effect. They went down to 66. I mean, I don't know where you live, but it's not that far off. Fahrenheit. 2 hours increased the non-shivering thermogenesis by 167%. That's air being exposed to cooler air. Water removes heat 20 times faster than air. And so you can do it in minutes. And there's a whole movement now of, Wim Hofers and guys who, are starting their shower or ending their shower with cold. It's easier to start with warm and with cold. But, that's one way, or, these cold immersion, these ice baths and things. It can be extreme, but it doesn't have to be. That's what I'm saying, to get a significant effect. It turns out that there are compounds in plants that can act on brown fat and uncouple and basically do the same thing cold is doing. Right? Capsaicin or capsaicinoids, which you probably heard about, in pepper, red pepper. Berberine, which is also from a plant. Alpha-ketoglutarate is, alpha-ketoglutarate is a molecule that's involved in energy pathways in the Krebs cycle. So capsaicin and capsaicinoids, they're in the red peppers. One dose, a 9 milligram dose, caused a threefold increase in energy expenditure, and daily ingestion for 6 weeks increased the cold exposure response as well. So there's a YouTube that you can look at, which is Yonoshiro is the Japanese researcher who did this work, and it's really interesting, and it's pretty impressive, right? I mean, that's I know that very much in the news is this new weight loss drug. I'm blocking on the name of it. But people are losing, 15% their body weight. I mean, huh? Yeah. But there's a new syndrome. The Scream, what's that artist's name? Of the subcutaneous fat has been lost. So now these people are going to, I mean, obviously it was overdone. It should, should have pulled back earlier. And it appears as if you have to stay on it for life. Because if you go off it, most people gain weight back. So that's been one of the biggest problems, obviously, in the weight wars, right? It's sustainability. And, this, I think, is something that you could work into your lifestyle pretty easily. Berberine is from Rhizome coptidis. It's a plant that's been used for diarrhea. And they noticed that there was weight loss and positive effects on blood sugar and blood fats. And the way it works is it activates brown adipose tissue. And this is something you can pick up in the health food store or online. Alpha ketoglutarate is a really interesting article. A lot of attention, recycling the cell. It activates that. It's an uncoupler, but it also has been shown very specifically to increase insulin, growth hormone, insulin-like growth factors, which are very much related to muscle. And then hormones associated with the positive effects of exercise, so right? It also has been shown to inhibit muscle breakdown, stimulate muscle growth, increase collagen. It sounds like an ad, right? I mean, it's pretty incredible. And there's a researcher, Brian Kennedy, who's at the Buck Institute, I think, and he's done research with alpha ketoglutarate. And now when you have a claim for some anti-aging compound, you can test it. Before you could make all sorts of claims because nobody was going to be able to do the study and see who ended up, living longer or staying healthy longer. It was too long time frame. But now they have these, biological age machines that are pretty impressive. I mean, there's a lot of consensus. Horvath is one of the most prominent. And so you can give somebody an agent and then a year later or a month later, see, is there been a change in their biological age? And Brian Kennedy, who's a very well-respected, guy, researcher, did it with alpha ketoglutarate, and there was a really significant decrease, less than a year. And there has to be a product now, Rejuvant, which is alpha ketoglutarate, but it's in a form so that it's time release. That was one of the problems. And you look at the data when people taking it and just, you take it and it's in, and you didn't have the same results. And Rejuvant, will send you a test to determine your biological age when you start taking it, and you can repeat it. So they're very upfront. It's actually, I think, part of the research is they're gathering data, but it looks like a very promising thing. And there are no side effects. I mean, it's not. I mean, I guess if you took enough of it, you could get to side effects, but not at these doses. So let's go back now to just sort of, the biological process or what's going on with age body composition. we know that subcutaneous fat decreases. That's why we start bruising more easily. Unfortunately, visceral fat increases, and that's a problem. Muscle mass decreases. And this is something that people don't take into account usually because they're looking at weight and they're not looking at body. Just losing fat. If in the studies, they've shown that anywhere between 20 and 50% of the weight that's lost is muscle, and that's not good because that's not moving forward. The scale looks good, but it's not good for you. So let's talk about muscle for a bit. Muscle has a very high metabolic rate, even if it's not being worked, because it has to be ready. So it's always in the green room, sort of. And it's the primary organ that's responsible for clearing the sugar out of the bloodstream, taking the glucose up and metabolizing. And the blood levels of glucose and lipid are very much determined by muscle metabolism. And if you have high glucose or lipid levels, that's the beginning of a bad story in terms of these diseases like diabetes mellitus, cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attack, myocardial infarction. And that's what is probably most commonly tested for, right? You go for your annual and you get all of that stuff, your blood sugar level. And the thing is they don't, and your weight, and they don't look at your body composition. And it's not something that you can be great at in terms of eyeballing it. So we're saying less muscle, more fat, weight gain. You lose muscle, your metabolic rate goes down. So you're prone to lose more. You're prone to gain more weight, right? The other thing that happens is you lose some insulin sensitivity. And insulin is a storage hormone. It triggers messages to store energy. So when sensitivity goes down, it's like if you're ringing a bell and it's getting dimmer and dimmer, you ring it more times. That's what the body starts doing. It increases, the level of insulin in the blood. That increases glucose uptake and fat production. And it inhibits fat burning. So it's a vicious cycle. You lose muscle and you gain fat, and you're going to start, you gain weight more rapidly. And then the obvious other thing is muscle and function. We start losing muscle around the age of 40 if we don't do something about it. And it's not, there are different types of muscle fibers, right? And in the most basic categorization, there's fast twitch and there's slow twitch. And slow twitch are for endurance, and fast twitch are for strength and power. And you lose, if you're not looking at fiber type, but you say you lose 1% of size a year, 2 to 4% of strength, 8 to 10% of power. And the reason is because the fast twitch are larger fibers. And so they take up more space so that you seem smaller when you lose those fibers. And they are most connected to strength and power, but more power. And the difference, just to remind you, between strength and power, strength is how much you can move a weight, let's say, against a force, but it doesn't matter how fast you're doing it. Power is how fast can you move a certain weight. And it doesn't seem logical, but getting out of a chair is power. Try getting out of a chair slowly sometime, right? It's not easy. Those are power move. Climbing stairs, power. And so one of the things I'm going to talk about is, well, how do you address this loss of, fast twitch fibers? I love this quote: you don't stop moving because you're getting old. You're getting old because you stop moving. So the other thing, in the same way that fat is an endocrine tissue in that it secretes all of these molecules that cause inflammation, muscle is also endocrine in the sense that it secretes hormones, and they are very good for you. And they have an impact on body composition, bone density, inflammation. It lowers the insulin sensitivity, it raises it, suppresses tumor growth, enhances cognitive function. I mean, bottle that, but we have it. So if we're talking about nutrition, I think the only nutrition that makes real sense is muscle centric. And one thing people always say, what's the best diet? And the only honest answer to that is there is no such thing as a best diet. And if you look at incredibly healthy, the remaining hunter-gatherer, cultures on the planet, they eat radically. I mean, you have Inuit who haven't seen a vegetable maybe in their life. They eat really fatty fish, and then you have vegetarian people. You have people who are fed mostly on it's so radically different, and they're all perfectly healthy. So there is no right answer, but there is an answer to what do you need to age well. And this is where I think muscle becomes the central topic. So muscle mass, how much muscle you're able to hold on to, is determined by the balance between anabolism, which is muscle protein synthesis, it's how muscles grow, and catabolism, which is muscle breakdown. And it's always in flux. And the two biggest triggers of muscle growth are protein and exercise, or using the muscle. One of the things they call it anabolic resistance. As we age, you get this anabolic resistance. But the interesting thing is, if you have a high protein diet, you can go right back to, we need more because we don't absorb it as well, but you can have the same muscle content as a muscle. And they've done these studies, I think it was in the press recently, where they looked at, there were people who were joggers and marathoners, and people who either did no exercise or were weightlifters. And I don't mean, competitive weight. I mean, they just went to the gym and did some weight. And what they found was the guy who didn't exercise at all had more muscle mass than the marathoners and the joggers. And it's now we're talking about older people, so that might not be, you might not see that in the 40s, but it starts becoming more and more apparent. And the problem is maintaining the fast twitch fibers. So high protein diet can take us back to, we need to take in more protein than we did as a younger person, but it can take us back to the same balance where we're not in a net loss in terms of muscle mass. So what are the protein requirements? What are we talking about high protein diet? The traditional, and this is still what you will find on the internet, probably from the USDA and the AMA even, 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight. This is another thing where even if that were right, it couldn't be right, because how can it, a 6-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 50-year-old, a 90-year-old, how could they have the same requirements? Or it doesn't make any sense. But even if at this level, 1/3 of adults over 50 don't meet that requirement. It's more like approaching 2 grams per kilogram per body weight a day. And that translates to about 1 gram a pound. And it's almost impossible to do this with food. So you have to do your balanced diet, whatever, and then use a supplement. And the best supplement protein is whey, which is a dairy product, but you can get it in a form that has a lot less of the lactose if you're lactose intolerant. It has all the essential amino acids, so it's called a complete protein. And it has that highest branch chain in lysine. Lysine seems to be the one amino acid that most powerfully stimulates muscle protein synthesis. I know a lot of products have come on the market that are plant-based protein, and it's just important to know that these are not going to give you the same amount of protein absorbed because they have fiber, and there's a different quality of protein in terms of which amino acids in particular make up the protein, and also in terms of the quantity that you'll be getting. So this is just an example. 25 grams of whey is the equivalent of 37 grams of a pea protein, or 40 grams of soy protein, or 51 grams of oat protein. And if you when you take it, you want to spread it out, but the most important is the first and last, because those are on either side of the fast, the nighttime fast. And so you want to be able to really get the protein in at those two times especially. Just in terms of when you go, if you do to look at it, this is what those, you'll see whey concentrates, isolates, hydroxylates, and this is what that means. As I was saying, the isolates, can be better for people who have lactose intolerance, if that's a problem. Also, another thing, and this is true for any product you're getting, if you see proprietary blend, I wouldn't buy it. If they can't tell you what's in it, I wouldn't buy it, because it's usually a cover for bad things, and sugar and stuff. Sucralose is okay, but yeah, I would avoid that. So that's the dietary side, of taking care of muscle. What about the exercise? How do you get at the fast twitch? Activities of daily living. I forgot about fall prevention. When you're walking and suddenly it's a sudden response that gets you back to your center of gravity, right? You can't just sort of correct slowly before you hit the ground. So it's an incredibly important thing. And the way you have to train it is either with fast movements or heavy. But the thing is, it's interesting. It's fast, but it doesn't have to move fast, but you have to be sending a message that you are trying to move fast. Not that you can fool it, but it can be so heavy that you're moving slowly, but you're trying to move quickly. And the two, I think, easiest and best ones are sprinting. And again, it doesn't matter how fast you're running. It's just that you're running fast for you, And then a deadlift is just basically hip hinging and lifting anything that's heavy. And we do a lot of that in the class. And I think that's, one of the most important exercises you can do, just in terms of being able to be independent and, function at the top of your game. So before we stop, I wanted just to throw in, this is such a vast field, and there are a lot of start at the bottom because it was a really interesting story. Panda was one of the first researchers. He published in 2010, and he had done a study where he gave high-fat diet to these mice, and one could eat ad libitum, 24 hours a day, and the others were only able to eat at most, I think, 8 or 6 hours a day. And it was during their active time, I guess. They're active at night, so it was at night, so it'd be like our being fed during the day on the control. And they had the same number of calories and the same wheels, and they monitored their activity level, the cage. The ones who were eating ad libitum gained significant amounts of weight, and the others didn't. And so they started doing more and more experiments showing where people were their own controls. That would be the most elegant, right? So you have a diet where you're only eating in a 6-hour or 8-hour window, and then you have the same person eating across, the day time, and not change the calories in food, and they're gaining weight when they're eating outside of that time window. And so it's incredibly powerful, and it relates to what we were talking about in terms of a night shift and a day shift. And time restricted feeding is early time restricted feeding, which is to say, you can increase the length of the fast. Let's say you have dinner, skip breakfast, and your first meal's at lunch. Now, I know I just said that the most important time to take protein is before and after the fast, the night. And it turns out that if you have a protein shake with some kind of neutral liquid mixed in, so it could be coffee or something, but you don't break the fast. In other words, and the reason, and it makes sense, is that if you think about the macronutrients, right? Carbohydrate and lipid are energy. They're fuel, they're gasoline. Protein isn't. So protein isn't going to trigger the same types of things that fat or carbohydrate would. So you can get away with having that protein shake in the morning and not eating, and still get credit for not eating. You see what I mean? Yeah. The other thing is, as we were implying, not eating before bed, at least 2 hours before bed, is the best. But, well, these must be defined by our species, who we really have to rethink the idea. We're so wed to breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the reality is, once you're past, I don't know, 30, unless you're physically active, you better not be eating 3 meals a day, because you can't burn it. But I think we have so much programmed hunger, environmentally stimulated hunger, that I think we should. And it's interesting when you do some fasting, or you prolong time restricted feeding, and you have a longer period not eating. It starts changing your relationship to hunger. In the beginning, you're really hungry, and if you miss a meal that you're used to, you're obviously really hungry, and then it stops registering. So in terms of the macronutrients, it makes sense to increase your protein intake from every standpoint, but you burn more energy eating protein and carbs down. No refined grains, because that's basically pre-digested food. It's like someone chewed it for you. It eliminates a lot of the good things, and you don't want to take sugar in if you can manage. Don't drink your calories. Increase fiber. Don't eat while you're watching TV. They've done these experiments where they have people just eat as much, and I don't remember how it was like a self-replenishing, both if they wanted more, it was very easy to do. And the difference in the same person between eating while they were watching TV and when they said I'm full, and when they were not watching TV, is it was like half as much food, because you're not focused on it, I guess. If you can take a walk after meals, that's the best time to move. There's such a huge difference in the insulin sensitivity in people who are able to practice that, because we don't think about it this way, but we're eating because we needed energy to move, and we're eating our biggest meal of the day at the end of the day, and then we don't move. It's not a shock that there's a problem. We're sort of like cars where you stop at the red light and it sounds like the engine died, and that's just the new thing. We're like that. When we sit, our metabolic rate goes down, and if you sit longer, it goes down further. Because the body's job is to conserve energy. So if we're not about to move, well, I can take all of this offline and, we can store whatever's there. So, you want to try and it's amazing, you can just stand. If you walk, they've done all these different categories. You just stand by your desk and then you sit back down. You stand by your desk and you do one squat. You stand and then you walk for 5 minutes. Obviously, the more the better. But the difference between just standing and being weight bearing for 1 minute and sitting without that is enormous in terms of insulin sensitivity. So it's an easy low-hanging fruit. I think I'm going to stop there, and let you ask questions or any comments you have.
If you have like osteoporosis or anything like that, does that then affect the muscle mass also, or is it just the bone density?
No, that's a great question. It's actually, they are connected and in the opposite way. So as you lose muscle mass, you increase the rate of bone loss, because the thing that keeps the bone is, healthy and dense is tension on it, which is done by the muscles. So you need the muscle and you need the motion. Yeah.
And like if you're on, like I'm on Prolia right now. And so how does that affect, does that work in and increasing your bone mass as well as muscle mass? Is that what it does?
I don't think it would have an effect on the muscle mass, but
Okay.
bone, yeah,
Bone.
yeah,
So then you just have to work on the muscle
yeah.
part of it.
Yeah. And probably one of the best exercises for that is lifting something heavy,
Okay.
but doing it right.
Putting weights on the floor and just picking them up.
Yeah. Or you can take a gallon on each hand of something, or whatever's around. But you just want to make sure that you get your form down. So before you load, with anything, I would make sure you can have a wall behind you, and you take. It's almost like you can do it as a chair, you
Okay.
can sit down and stand. And that way, if you're doing that, and you'll feel it when it's right, you're going through the hip, so you're not going to hurt your back, because the whole idea is that the back shouldn't bend. It's
Okay.
all through the hip.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You hear a lot of ads for losing weight saying that it's really cortisol that makes us particularly put on, say, belly fat. Is that something you think is accurate, and is there something you can do about it?
It's true that it impacts weight gain and fat deposition, and so stress there's a few reasons you can have an elevated cortisol level, but it should be assessed. That's another thing that often isn't drawn in an annual cortisol level, which needs to be drawn in the morning, fasted. But you want to see where people are at, because it can be a variable that you need to pay more attention to, or isn't even at play. But stress management is the main in that variety of high cortisol. Yeah. Someone, yeah. I haven't seen a single bad negative article on the Mediterranean diet. I think it's proven. They were talking about olive oil before everybody was selling the fancy olive. I think it's real. Yeah.
Skipping meals and protein shakes would be wonderful, a good way to go. What would the protein shakes be like? What would you recommend?
Whey protein, I would definitely use that form. I have it in the morning in my coffee.
Wow.
You know, I know I'm gonna have a cup of coffee either way, and, you know, they come in flavors, and I get the chocolate. You just want to be, there's a Legion makes a good one in terms of brands. Thorn. If you don't have one of those recognizable, just look at what's in it, and you don't want anything except whey protein, you know, because they are always, oh, and it has creatine in it. Okay, well, that may be good, but I'm thinking it has a proprietary blend category in it.
So you put it in after your coffee is done or when it's brewing?
No, after.
After it's done?
After, yeah.
Always.
Yeah. I actually have, I like iced coffee, so I get cold brew. So I just, I have a bullet, you know, one of those blender drink, and I just put my coffee and the powder in and blend it.
And this is available at a health food store? I mean, where does one get this?
Yeah, I probably best to go online because it'll be a lot more reasonable. And yeah, just go right there. Yes.
I did Weight Watchers for a number of years, but I've done more exercise recently. I walk, I swim, and I do exercise for about an hour every morning. I have to do it very
Fantastic.
gently because I have issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, and I'm 83.
Oh, my God.
So I have found that their recommendations for protein are too low for me.
Yeah.
Their recommendations for fat don't fit either, because then I get bound up.
Yeah. I mean, you can't take in much more than 40 grams of protein in a sitting. So if you have 43 times a day, you're gonna, that's good. You'll be good. And you know, most of the scoops are 20 or something. Yeah. So, but this is the thing, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you.
The, you know, RDAs are defined, like the vitamin C RDA is, I don't know what it is, 12, 50 milligrams of vitamin C or something. That's the vitamin C that you need to prevent scurvy. It's nothing to do with health, right? So people forget that the RDA is not saying this is what's going to make you healthy. It's so low. It's and you know, people say, you know, but I don't want to put on a lot of muscle. You know, every guy in every gym and in the world is trying as hard as he can and can't. You know, women say that more often than not, and it's not a concern. You know, I mean, part of the body. It's kind of funny. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.